Many years ago, I experienced a scary event. This is a true story. I'm not making this up like my horror stories. So, I was walking down the street in Milwaukee, and suddenly somebody came up behind me, put their arm around my neck, stuck something against my back, and said, "Your money or your life." Now, in that moment, your brain, given the pressure of the situation, or my situation, or anybody's situation, says to you, you have two options: your money or your life. And so you might tend to believe that that dichotomy is true. A dichotomy is where you have two options or two extremes, like black and white, day and night, good and evil. These are all dichotomies. So you might then say, my money. Or you might say, go ahead, kill me. I don't care. Which means either you want to die or you're calling the person's bluff. Because some people who rob are not willing to take your life, but others are. It just depends on whom you've got behind the weapon and if they are carrying a weapon. But again, that is a dichotomy, and it's false. It is what you have been presented with, because that is what the robber wants you to believe are your options, and that there are no other options. But again, this is a false dichotomy. And in truth, there are very few dichotomies that are legitimate or real. So I froze for a second. And then I realized, now, okay, let me first say that it was clear to me that the person behind me was black from the way that he spoke. Now, is it possible that I was wrong? Maybe. Yeah, I mean, there are people who are not black who speak exactly the same way if they've grown up in that environment. I don't remember at this point, because this was back like 30 some years ago, I think, if I actually saw the person's arm when they, wrapped it around me. I think I did, but I don't actually specifically remember that. But from the voice only, the person sounded black. And now you're thinking, oh, you're such a racist, Glenn. Actually, no, I'm not. Anyways, I was right. He was black. So I froze. And then I said, Gary. And the guy let me go. I turned around. It was my friend Gary playing a joke on me. I hadn't seen him in a long time. It had been like a couple of years, I think, since I'd last seen him. So, it was cool to see him. And it was a funny joke. And to be honest, this was done in broad daylight on the street. There were other people. And I think that when you're in a situation like that, you might be less likely to believe the person behind you. Now, if this had been in an alley or in the park at night or something like that, somewhere dark, secluded, or absent of other people, I might have reacted with more fear, because, the environment that you're in has an impact on how you react to what's happening. But there are two main points here. Number one, I used this true story as an example of a real example of a false dichotomy. And number two, I want you to understand that there are more options than what you think there are. So, for example, I could have stepped as hard as I possibly could on his shirt, his shoe, trying to break his foot. I could have, and then to fight with him, I could have squished his foot and then made a run for it. I could have tried to turn and elbow him and fight or run. I could have tried to negotiate with him, not being certain of his sincerity in letting me have my life if he got my wealth. Of course, at that time, I was pretty poor. And yeah, I've never been a rich person. Yeah, that's sad truth, but I'm like most people. So I could have tried to psychologically manipulate him into feeling so bad for coming after me that he would have just like said, I'm sorry, I should have picked a better victim and walked away. That's pretty hard to do. And honestly, based on other experiences I've had, and I'll explain to you in a minute what I mean, I would say that most of the time trying to psychologically manipulate your attacker is going to be very, very unlikely to succeed because of factors like personality, major psychoses, like, say, psychopathy, which is actually antisocial personality disorder. Psychopathy is not an official diagnosis. Anybody who tells you otherwise is a liar. Or unless they get to the DSM-6 and they've changed it. Or say they're schizophrenic and they're in the middle of a hallucination. So you also don't know if that person has any sense of ethics or morality. You don't know if they tend to be violent or that they're in the throes of drug withdrawal and they're so strung out and so desperate to be high again that they're willing to do pretty much anything. I'm not saying you shouldn't try. If you know how to manipulate somebody, you can try. I'm just saying that, depending on who's got you, who's accosting you, you may fail. So there are always more options than the false dichotomy that we are often presented with. And it doesn't even have to be, and I want to give you a second example. So I was waiting for the bus in Milwaukee. I was in a bad part of town. I used to volunteer through a state aid program at Feeding America. And this was on 17th and Fond du Lac, I think it was, which is not a good area. And in fact, my manager there had pointed out to me, you see those holes in the roof? I was like, yeah, how did that happen? He said people shooting off guns and the bullets came down and hit the roof. Yeah, it's that kind of an area. Now, I always, no matter where I go, I try to present myself as somebody that's nice and somebody who is confident, because criminals are less likely to accost somebody who looks confident than somebody who looks like they're scared to be where they are. So, every time I would walk to Feeding America, I would greet. There was this one family that there was always, often, but not always, often somebody sitting on the porch, black family. And I would always say, "Hey, how you doing?" And I don't say that we were friends, but they would recognize me. I would recognize them. We were all, always nice to each other. I think one time I was leaving with a box of baked goods that Feeding America was going to have to throw away because it was getting close to the expiration date, and I think I gave them something from my box one time. This was, like 2017, 2018. So I'm not positive about that. But anyways, I was standing at the bus stop. And the bus takes a long time. In Milwaukee, they've had to cut down on some of the routes, and so sometimes you can wait a long time. And I've never had problems on the bus per se. There was one time where I saw a mother who was abusing her daughter, and I had to confront her about it. And she said, "Well, this is my daughter. I can do what I want." I said, "Well, no, actually, you can't hit her like that. And if you continue to do that, I'll call Child Protective Services." I wasn't being rude. I wasn't yelling at her. I was just letting her know the situation, and that I wasn't going to tolerate her hitting her daughter like that. And so, she backed down and didn't hit her daughter anymore in front of me. But that's a different story. So I was waiting, and this woman who was clearly not doing well, and most likely because of an addiction to alcohol, came up to me, and she asked me if I could give her some money. And I said no, and then I explained my bad financial situation, so that she would understand that I wasn't just blowing her off. I wanted her to understand that financially I was in a very poor situation, which is true. I had recently returned from Indonesia. I didn't have much money. I was on state aid. And I was mentally, I was wrecked from all the things that had happened before and after my wife's death. And so instead of saying, "Oh yeah, he doesn't have it," and there was another reason though, and I want to be just transparent here. There was another reason. I personally. And I know that there are people out there who've been in that position and will probably disagree with me. And you're welcome to politely tell me why you disagree with me in the chat or comments. But I personally do not agree with providing money to people so they can get their high, get drunk, whatever. On the other hand, I do believe that if there is the possibility of setting up a safe kind of clinic where somebody can go in and can get syringes and can be in a clean, safe environment where they're not going to get rolled, where they're not going to get stabbed, where they're not going to be sharing dirty needles and ending up with some kind of a disease, where they're not going to be getting unsafe drugs. And so they can slowly try to hopefully want to get off their drug of choice or drugs of choice. I believe that's a good thing, and I would wholly support that. But when somebody on the street comes up to me and asks me for money for drugs or for cigarettes or whatever, because of experiences I've had, my inclination is to just say no. Now, I have given some people something. Like one time there was this old man that was on the island between on a major road, and I was at a stoplight, and I had a couple of bananas with me, and I saw this guy, and I said, here, have one. And he took it, and he didn't complain or anything like that. Now, I've had other people were like, well, I haven't eaten, and I said, well, let me go get you some food. No, I just need some money. And then I'm like, no, you're turning down food when you're saying you need food. But so this woman was clearly not well, and it was because of some kind of addiction. And I guessed it was alcohol, because alcohol is a very common problem in this country amongst all socioeconomic classes. It has nothing to do with the fact that I was in a poor area with a lot of crime. Well, maybe it does, but I don't know. So instead of accepting my clarification, she became offended by it, and she was becoming rude with me. And I tried to talk her down. She wouldn't listen. I turned my back on her, and she just kept on going on. And she was starting when people would walk by. I also tried yelling at her, and I tried swearing at her to get her to leave me alone, and that didn't work either. And she started to try to get passersby to be angry at me. So she was making false claims about me so that they would want to beat me up. And, being the minority in the neighborhood that I was in, it was a little bit nerve-wracking. Now, Fortunately for me, after the second or third time that she tried to get somebody to come over and help her, I guess you could say, the bus came and I got on and I was safe. And I never had to go back there again. It turned out to be my last day there because they wanted me to try something else. But yeah, so the dichotomy that was presented was give me money or don't give me money. I chose not to give money, but I also explained why. She didn't like that. The problem that I see, and this is very, very common, especially in the last, say, well, since I've come back to the U.S. and even before I came back to the U.S., I have noticed that politicians and people who support certain politicians, well, not even, I shouldn't even say certain politicians. Most people who support specific politicians from any of the parties that I have had interaction with use false dichotomies to try and manipulate you into voting for somebody who you are less interested in. Or so like they may say, well, you know, if Harris takes over, this country's going to go to hell. And so you got to vote for Trump because nobody else is going to win. If you don't vote for Trump, if you know, I say, well, I might vote for Jill Stein. And they will be like, well, if you vote for Jill Stein, she's never going to win. So you're basically, by not voting for Trump, you're voting for Harris. Or they'll say, you're throwing your vote away. That's a false dichotomy. That's a lie. So they're presenting that there's only this dichotomy that is true, and anything else is false or is helping the side you don't want. But see, we're not in a bipartisan country. Our government actually allows for more than just two parties. And there have been other parties in office. There has been the Tea Party most recently, but there have been independents. There have been people from other parties as well. Socialist, I believe, and Green, and so on. So that's another false dichotomy that we frequently are fed. And in fact, I would say if you're watching mainstream media, whether it's right, left, or whatever, you always, well, almost always only hear about Democrats and Republicans. You might rarely hear about libertarians, but really libertarians are a specific breed of Republican. They, because they're very much into small government and stuff. So they're really actually a Republican fraction or faction, I should say, as is the Tea Party. And then you get the Green Party, which is more of a liberal party. And then there's the Socialists. I'm not really sure whether I should classify Socialists as Democratic or Republican. Although I would say based on economics that they're Democratic because Democrats are very much into individual wealth. Republicans are individual wealth and Democrats are not necessarily anti-individual wealth, but they're more interested in equity for a large swath of the population rather than population power and wealth being concentrated in a small proportion of the population, which is what happens under capitalism, under many other systems of economics as well as governance. So, and in theory, it shouldn't happen with socialism and communism, and unfortunately, because of human nature, that's why socialism, communism, democracy, monarchy, and everything else become corrupted and bad. It doesn't really matter which of those systems. They all have flaws in that they are controlled by humans and therefore can be corrupted by humans. But yeah, it's a false dichotomy that we often hear. You know, if you hear anything other than Democrat or Republican on YouTube, or other than me, or on mainstream media or the radio, it's probably going to be libertarian. And it's very unlikely that you're going to hear about the other parties. I mean, the last time that I heard anything about the Green Party on mainstream media was when Ralph Nader was still running. and then throwing his vote to one side or the other, or his voters, I mean. The truth of the matter is, when somebody says the lesser of two evils, they are, number one, they are admitting that both the Republicans and the Democrats are evil. Now, in my experience, in nearly 58 years of life, and let's just set aside, say, the first 15 years of my life. So we're still talking about over 40 years of observation and stuff, even though some of that predates and is in those first 15 years. If I look at what I've seen, it's true. Republicans and Democrats, those two parties are evil. They maintain a certain status quo. And whereas perhaps in the past when I was young, these parties had loyal supporters. And if somebody supported one party, they didn't support the other party. Well, there was at some point, and I don't know when this happened. It could have happened before I was born. I really don't know. At some point, some supporters decided, you know what? It doesn't matter which party wins. All that matters is when it comes to things that are important to me as the millionaire or billionaire, they vote my way. So I'm going to donate, or which is a form of bribery, to the Republican candidate and the Democratic candidate. Both. Because that way, the deck is stacked. It doesn't matter which one wins. When I call up and say, hey, I want you to kill that bill, that person is going to work to kill the bill. Or whatever it happens to be. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a bill. It can be backrooms influence, and a lot of other stuff. But when you talk about the lesser of two evils, it's an admission that the Republican and Democratic parties are corrupt, are maybe not necessarily actually evil, but have an agenda that is not really for, of, and by the people, but is really for, of, and by, to one degree or another, depending on the candidate, businesses and private individuals with wealth and power. And they don't want you to realize when they're saying the lesser of two evils, that means that there are other options. Because if the lesser of two evils is the only option, and that's what they try to promote by saying, oh, you only have two choices, the Republicans and the Democrats, then you're like in heaven or you're like in hell, in a place where a true dichotomy cannot exist, or even a spectrum cannot exist, because it's either pure evil or pure good. They're trying to convince you that you're in that kind of a situation where there is no really good option, which is also a lie. And when they say things like, well, if you vote for Trump, that means Harris is going to win. Right? So if you don't vote for Trump, that means Trump can't win, and none of the other candidates are going to win, which means you're voting for Harris by not voting for Trump. That's a falsehood. That is false logic that they are using. In a manner of speaking, it's true. However, I believe that if everyone actually was made aware of all the parties, and the major parties have worked very hard to suppress all of the other parties. Like, when's the last time you saw a third-party candidate, other than RFK, involved and in the public eye? And I'm glad that RFK dropped out because he was kind of wacko. Sorry, but some of the things he said were just way out there, which is why he sided with Trump, I guess, because Trump says some very strange things too. So when's the last time you saw a third-party candidate in a presidential debate? Now, I haven't watched all the presidential debates there were, so it's hard for me to say that. So to clarify, in the year 2000, debate access rules were made even more restrictive to eliminate third-party candidates, because anybody who wanted to be in the debates had to clear 15% in pre-debate opinion polls. Now, with media giving little to no airtime, so to speak, or attention to third-party candidates, it is almost impossible for any third-party candidate to get 15% in a pre-debate opinion poll. And with all the other things that the Democrats and Republicans have done together to rig the system against third parties, it is unlikely that we will ever again see a third-party candidate in a debate. Now, the first time that I'm aware of that this happened was when I was still, I think, a teen. No, not a teen. I was a kid. This was, 1980. Ronald Reagan and John Anderson debated. I didn't watch it. President Carter refused to be involved in that debate. And then in the next debate between Reagan and Carter, he was not invited. So John Anderson was in one debate, one presidential debate. So that was the first time that I'm aware of in debate history, presidential debate history, that a third-party candidate was allowed in. And then the second time was when George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton debated in three debates in 1992 and included independent Ross Perot, who was a businessman who kept on ducking in and out of the race. He eventually declined to be involved. Apparently, part of the reason he was able to get into the debates was because Mr. Bush was asking that he be allowed in. I feel like that with this case, there is a possibility, and I don't have any proof, but that there was a possibility that Bush wanted him in as a vote splitter against Clinton winning. But I don't know for sure. And obviously, it's unlikely that I will ever find out. So because Perot was able to get into the debates, his participation went from 7% before the debates to 19% on election day. So that shows us how strongly the false dichotomy of the lesser of two evils prevents third-party candidates from being able to participate fairly. And the restrictions against third parties have only gotten worse. In fact, Jill Stein, for this presidential campaign period, has been denied federal funding, even though she reached the threshold for receiving it. So it's yeah, and there are lots of stories. If you look at from the Libertarians, if you look at from other parties, there are lots of stories about exclusion from debates, exclusion from multi-party events, or that they are allowed in, but they aren't given a table or any particular space where they can set up, or they are allowed in, but they cannot speak, and so on and so forth. So it's often because of laws and or because the major donors who are sponsoring these events don't want those third-party candidates to have a seat at the table. So there's a lot of exclusion from the private sector, from the business sector, and from the government. So it's a false dichotomy, which means, if you think about it, if the lesser of two evils is not factual, what are the alternatives? Well, some of the other alternatives are going to be evil too, so to speak. I mean, depends on your perspective. So there has been a great increase in people interested in socialism, especially amongst the young, because they are fed up, and rightfully so, with our system. In fact, I know a lot of socialists at Amazon, and they are trying to help to unionize Amazon, at least where I'm located, And I know a lot of people who are Republicans and Democrats that are also very heavily involved in trying to help unionize Amazon because Amazon is a monopoly, that antitrust violations, it breaks the law on a routine basis. I've seen it. I've been the victim of it. And so have many other people that I've spoken to. But that's beside the point. So some of the other possible candidates, whether it's presidential or otherwise, are also going to be evil, as in bad choices. And then there will be the other options who are not actually taking money from special interests, not actually corrupted, and who legitimately seek to help us, the majority of the population. Now, of course, there's always the risk because many of these people are very polished and very skilled at manipulating your perception of them, and even lying. And there's a lot of this mudslinging, or more often these days, I would say it's not just mudslinging, but actually it's backstabbing. And I do not agree with the fact that presidential candidates cannot be sued for slander and libel. I firmly believe that the way candidates for any race behave, when they behave in a negative way, where they're spewing out lies and vitriol toward their opponents, this is teaching the American public that it is acceptable to behave in this immature, irresponsible, and damaging manner, and that has a negative impact on our society as a whole, as well as each culture that is within our society, because we have many cultures within our society. And I think that it should be outlawed. I think that, that freedom of speech is important, but when you are lies, you should be held liable for telling lies. And there are certain candidates in this presidential race who are lying nearly constantly, and if they were to be held to task for all those lies, they would probably be in prison. So look at the other candidates and say, okay, I don't like Trump. I think I like Kamala. But this other candidate, whoever it may be, maybe it's Cornel West, maybe it's Marianne Williamson. I forgot the other ones. I'm sorry. Jill Stein. RFK's already out. Anyways, maybe there are other candidates out there. I just don't remember their names. Sorry. You can look it up. However, if setting aside the problem of determining if somebody is lying or manipulating or gaslighting the populace to get votes, that's one thing. And some people are able to figure that out. I mean, I listen carefully to things, and I'm fairly good because I've had experience with psychopaths. I've had experience with narcissists. I've had experience with con artists. I've gotten fairly good at determining if a candidate is being dishonest. Now, some candidates, it's very hard to say because they're very clever. They're very careful and calculating with what they say that's not true. But other candidates are just stupid about it. They make it very easy to tell. And that's not the purpose of this video to expose who that is. But the other thing that you can do is looking at the history of candidates you're considering and their policy positions. So I would suggest that you go to isidewith.org or one of the other websites that offers a nonpartisan political quiz that you can take. Now, there are a certain number of questions that by default will appear, and then any other questions, you have to click see more questions in order to answer more. You can go through all of them, or you can just do the minimum that they have showing by default. Also, you can choose one of the options that they present that has been answered by the candidates, or you can choose to write in your own option. However, the problem with your own option is, depending on how soon or how late you put your question or answer, or sorry, your choice in, is going to determine how many people might see it if they want to see all the options, because it doesn't show you all the options. It'll show you like 3 options, and then there's a 4th option. You can click to see more options, and then when you have that open, you can even type in your own. But if you say, if iSide starts polling participants in, say, February, and you put your question in March, a proportion of the people who do the questionnaire after March will see your custom choices if the custom choice you've put in there is for one of the default questions in a category. If it's not a default question, it's one where you have to actually click see more questions in order to actually find it, then an even smaller percentage of people will take that custom choice that you have written. And also keep in mind that a lot of people are not going to look at see more questions. They're not going to click on that. So the number of people who will click on your custom answer is going to be comparatively very small. So there are 2 things you can do. Number 1 is put a custom answer into everything very early on in the polling on iSidewith. The second thing you can do is whatever the default choices are, use that word at the start of your choice. So if the question is, do you think that climate change should be high priority? Yes or no? You say no, but you want to add qualifiers. Or maybe you say yes and no, so you want to clarify that. So then you click on see more questions, and then you click on write in my own answer or whatever it is, and you type in, say, for example, if you're more toward yes, you'll type in yes, but, and then you clear with the caveats or clarifications. Or if you lean more toward no and, or but, or whatever, So you that word has to be there. And the reason for this is I believe that the way iSidewith decides how aligned you are with each candidate is not on a spectrum. It's based on those default answers. So if your choice doesn't have that one of those default answer words in it at the beginning, I believe, then it won't be able to match you with any candidates. And I have seen it where it matched me with a candidate where I put in a custom answer, they didn't put in a custom answer, but both of us said no, or both of us said yes, or both of us said more, or both of us said less. So I believe that is extremely important if you're going to do custom answering. Unfortunately, again, we come back to the problem that not everyone will see your custom answers, and not everyone is going to choose your custom answers. The more the answers become customized, the less likely it is that somebody's going to choose your answer. And a lot of people are not going to want to look at extra answers. They just want to get it done as quickly as possible. Maybe they don't want to have to think too hard. They just want A or B. Or maybe they don't have time. Or maybe that's just the way they look at the world in black and white, these false dichotomies. The world is spectrums. There's virtually no real dichotomies. Almost, in other words, almost no dichotomies. I can't say there aren't any, but there are very few true dichotomies. So, getting back to the point of my video, I kind of gotten off to the side with the politics stuff. When you're talking to somebody about anything and they say, here are your choices, A or B. Think carefully, because usually when somebody tries to restrict you to two options, there's a reason for it. Now, if you're at the store and you say, "Well, I want to buy a set of speakers," and it's a small store, not like one of those big box stores, for my portable little radio thing, because I don't always want to have the earplugs in. The earplugs irritate my ears, so I want to use little speakers I can carry around and plug into it. And it happens at that store they only have two options that you can choose from. Then that's a true dichotomy, right? No, not exactly, because you don't have to buy at that store unless there are no other stores possible for you to go to. If there's nothing available to you online and there's nothing available to you within the distance that you can travel to go to it, then it's a true dichotomy. Otherwise, it's another false dichotomy. But the salesperson isn't going to tell you, "Oh, by the way, if you don't like these two options, go to that store over there." Now, I actually have had that experience. I have had, when I've talked to a salesperson, I've said, "Well, this doesn't really work for me. I can't use that one either. Are there any other choices?" "We don't have any choices here other than these two, but you could go to that store." I have very rarely actually had salespeople say that, and I really appreciate that kind of honesty. But yeah, so we are constantly being presented with false dichotomies, and this really irritates me because it starts in preschool, in pre-primary, that we are taught. We are taught about favorites, and we are taught about other stuff. And teaching favorites in the context of people understanding what a favorite is fine. But if you're constantly telling people year after year after year that they have to choose a favorite, that's another sort of false dichotomy that teaches people that there are only a small number of options, when in fact there aren't. And you don't have to have only one favorite. You don't have to have one best friend. You don't have to have one favorite soda. You don't have to have one favorite movie. You can have as many favorites of anything as you want, as long as they're legitimately your favorite for one reason or another, or multiple reasons. Unfortunately, along with standardized testing, which only provides us with a certain number of options, it may be true, false, it may be ABC or ABCD, something like that. School teaches us there are always a limited number of options, and that decreases our ability to be creative and our ability to identify other options that are unstated. And there is very little teaching in school, whether it's pre-primary, primary, secondary, or even in university oftentimes, there's very little teaching that, "Oh, by the way, I know we are just talking about these things, but I want you to be aware that there are also these other options that you can research on your own time. I don't have time to cover all of the options, but I want you to," and there are also other options that I'm not going to mention here. If you research, you will probably find them. This is not something that's taught. It's something you have to relearn. Because when you're a baby, the world is it's like your oyster, in a manner of speaking. It's like your treasure chest. And as you get older and you go through this indoctrination system, which could be school, which could be religion, which could be political, which could be cultural, you are forced to become less and less and less creative in regards to identifying other options. And you are also taught to be more and more dependent and less able to create your own way to be successful. And this is deliberate, because whether it's public education or most private education, they are not there to produce leaders. They're not there to produce entrepreneurs or even just regular business people. They are there to produce workers. Whether they know it or they don't know it, That is the job of most educators. And I'm sorry, I used to be an educator. I do not like what I see in education. There are many, many, many problems with education, especially standardized testing, and that forces teaching to the test, and some schools actively push teachers to teach to the test. And there's a whole knock-on effect. There are a whole bunch of other factors involved, but it boils down to schools try to prepare students, most schools, to become worker bees, not to become leaders, and so on. I remember many years ago, Texas tried to pass a law to improve the quality of education in Texas. And so many business leaders protested, saying, if you do that, we're not going to have enough workers, that Texas didn't do it. And that would have been so good for Texas. It would have helped Texas to become a stronger state by having more people who are able to lead, who are able to create businesses that can flourish. But the selfish business people refuse to acknowledge that there would still be a huge number of people within the population of Texas and other states, and even from other countries, that they could choose from to fill up the ranks of the employees. It was selfish and short-sighted, and our government has always been this way. So, my homework for you is two-part. First of all, I would love it if you could, in the comments, and for each point, make a separate comment, please, because I want people to be able to talk about different things separately. Please identify in each comment that you make a false dichotomy that you have noticed, and try to explain it as best as you can. And then I also want you to feel free to share experiences you've had where people have tried to convince you to accept a false dichotomy. And I'll give you an example of my own final one before the end of this video. So I was talking to a friend of mine at work, and this guy is very smart. And he and I were talking about the presidential campaign, which everybody's talking about, I guess. And I said, I just watched the debate, and I said to him, "Hey, did you watch the debate?" You know, I've known this guy for a year and a half now at work. I mean, we're not like close friends or anything like that, but we get along fine. He's a hard worker. He's a nice guy. And he said, no. I said, well, Trump got totally crushed by Kamala. And he became angry about that. And he was like, well, I'm never going to vote for Kamala. And I was like, well, you know, why? And he gave his reasons. His reasons were based on a false understanding of Kamala. And I was like, he was getting indignant. And so I dropped it, because, you know, I liked the guy and I didn't want to argue with him. And it was clear that there was no way that I was going to be able to get him to see the error of his ways. And this was a black man, okay? And so in his mind, not only could he not see Kamala as an option, there were no other options. And I've seen this over and over and over again with people in politics and in so many other ways. So please understand that life is full of spectrums, and almost none of the dichotomies that you see or are told or experience are really dichotomies. Okay? So again, a dichotomy is black or white, up or down. I mean, there's always, in between black and white, there are all these grays, right? Everything is shades of gray. And I'm not referencing the movie about sadomasochism. and bondage and domination. I am referencing the fact that everything comes in a spectrum. Everything. I mean, I'm sure that if I were to think about it, I'd probably find some things that are true dichotomies, but it's rare. And it's usually something that is something that's a very scientific thing or very, very, very specific. So, again, please write in the comments your thoughts, your points on dichotomies, and please remember, I do not tolerate rudeness, trolling, insults, or anything like that. Keep it civil, or you will suffer the consequences. That's all there is to it. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share, and have a great day. Hi. Thank you for watching my video, and I hate doing this, but things have gotten pretty sketchy with my employer, and without going into all the details, which I have covered at other times, at least in part, I need some financial assistance. If you have the opportunity to do so, that's great. If you don't, even if you can just put in a word of support in the comments, that helps. To have even just that is good. But financially, I need to be able to carry on doing what I'm doing with these channels. Not so much this channel, not so much the Eclectician channel, which is mostly just me learning about stuff and sharing it with you, but with my Glenn's Fast Reviews channel, where most of what you see that I review, I've purchased myself, or I've gotten at a food pantry, or somebody gave to me because they know I do reviews. But I have invested huge amounts of money in it. And at this point, with a little over 1,800 viewers, I'm earning maybe $125 a month, which doesn't cover the cost of what I've done, let alone the ongoing cost. And then even worse than that is my third channel that's the PC Expert Amateur, which I've invested a large sum of money that I should have been saving for my retirement, because I wanted to be able to present a lot of information about fans and air coolers and water coolers for computers and other things as well. And in order to do that, I had two choices. I either had to make deals with manufacturers and sell my soul, or stick to my ethics and pay for things myself in order to not be beholden to somebody and not feel like, oh, I owe them. So yeah, it's pretty costly, and with the situation with my employer Amazon, in which the workers' compensation company Sedgwick refuses to fix my shoulder, which was injured at work over a period of months last year because Amazon's management refused to abide by their own policies to provide me support. I may end up having to pay for the surgery myself with the help of my insurance, and that will still be very expensive. And then I would be out of work for at least a month. So switching to another job, it would be hard, because if I come to you and I say, hey, I want to work for you, and you're like really interested in me, and then I say, oh, by the way, in the near future, I'm going to be having a shoulder replacement, so I will probably be out of work for a month. You're probably going to say, I'll pass, thanks, though. Which would actually be illegal, and you won't tell me that's why you're not choosing me. But, you know, it is a problem, especially with me being as old as I am. I'm almost 58. So if you could please, if you can either go to the my YouTube channel, Glenn's Fast Reviews, and you can make any kind of a donation on there, any size, any time you want, through that, because that's my monetized channel. Or you can go to patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Glenn MII. That's GLENNMII. And you can make a recurring donation
The smallest one I have on there right now is $10. If that's too big for you to give on a monthly basis, let me know. I can always add a smaller one than that. You know, I just need to know. But again, if you are financially strapped, please don't send me money. I don't want somebody else getting into trouble financially just to help me. That would weigh very heavily on my conscience. So, thanks again for watching this video, and let's make the world a better place.